signing up to get in now. I'm an old lady.
Usually this is really,
It
really
was.
funny.
Yeah, that's a while ago.
Yesterday was about half of what we usually do.
That's a real milestone.
This way John Potassium.
Are you garbage too?
Yeah.
Okay, so are you paying songs for it?
Lots of different kinds.
There's more people than usual, but it's more people than usual for a Saturday.
Yeah, move any chairs around, make yourself at home.
Well, in behalf of the Kelly House Board, we welcome you today and thank you so much for being here. This is our 32nd History Talk, and we're very privileged today to have Dean Stone here to tell us about his paintings and about his adventures in the South Pacific during World War II. So we are also honoring the veterans on Memorial Day through him. So we're very happy that he could be part of our presentation today. And this is Dean Stone, and you would like to ask for a moment of silence? It's all yours.
I think I should say a few words leading up to the pictures, the paintings. You understand a little more how they came to be made. I was a art student at California College of Arts and Crafts, graduated and started my studio in San Francisco, and I shared it with Lou Baguetta, who was a sculptor that worked on the bar release for the Golden Gate International Exposition. And we were one block away from the Rust Building on the third floor of a building there. And if you could believe it, I shared the rent with her, and it was $12.50 for my share, $25 for the whole floor. And she moved out after a while. She retired to Vallejo, and I took over the studio and started my business. And I had accumulated some nice accounts. I was working for the Yuba Manufacturing Company that built gold dredges prior to the war, and I photographed the last dredge being shipped to Russia just before the war. And it was on December 7th that I was sitting in my studio and retouching some photographs early in the morning, and I couldn't believe the radio came on and said that Hawaii had been attacked and bombed, and the destruction was terrific, and it was just unbelievable. I had no, I guess, been caught unaware, just like the country had been. And so after a few years, after a few months of the war started, my father had been working for Jocelyn and Ryan, Naval Architects, and he said, you better come down, they need some draftsmen here. And he said, the pay is steady, and I said, well, that sounds good, because when you have your own studio, it's not, it's up and down. And so I joined Jocelyn and Ryan, and was a draftsman for the ventilation department, designing seaplane tenders and submarine tenders for World War II. It was a pretty exciting job. There are a lot of things, problems to be overcome, and But along the way, I met a number of architects and other people who were more or less in the same boat. And Bob Vanchin, Vanchin and Allen was one of them. And while I was there at Jocelyn and Ryan, on weekends I had photographed this large home in Woodside from Ralph K. Davies, who was then the oil coordinator. And it's really a beautiful spot. Just 62 years old or so, and now they're talking about tearing it down and subdividing it, and the city of Woodside is trying to raise money to make it a preserved or national monument. But one of the other accounts I had was the Yuba Manufacturing, and they had imported, not imported, but brought over the lathes to make 155 millimeter howitzers for the war, because at that time Britain was being heavily bombed, and they got these huge lathes out, and they were doing all the rifling for the barrels of the 155 millimeter guns. And I continued working on weekends on projects like that, and on weekdays we were working 60 hours a week, and the war went along, and I was in 3A, and then toward the beginning of 1945 we were phasing out the war, because the Battle of Britain of Europe is pretty well over, and so I was then reclassified from 3A into 1A, and my decision was to try to go in something, either the Navy or the Merchant Marine. I like to be around the water, and so a friend of mine said, well, you should go down to the SUP, Sailors Union of the Pacific, and join that, and you can ship out as a merchant marine and do the job for whatever the trip is. When you're back, you're out of the service, you don't have to go back again. As compared to 4 years in the Army, and having started my studio, I was looking ahead to thinking, well, I've got to think of myself too, and so therefore I decided to go in the Merchant Marine. And after 7 days training of rowing from Pier 7 to Fisherman's Wharf every day, I was ready to ship out, and went down to the hall that was assigned to a ship, and in the meantime I was moving all my personal belongings from my studio, the Pine Street Hill, to my home in San Francisco. And unbeknown to me, one of the boxes fell off the truck, and I didn't know anything about it immediately, and my wife and I kept having goodbye dinners. In other words, every dinner could be the last one. I never could tell when I was going to be shipped out, and the boat was going to be leaving. And so finally one day, I had to go up to the Van Ness Avenue to pick up some glasses for the bosun, and I took the opportunity of calling my wife and telling her that I wouldn't be home for dinner. So she got the gist of that, and the next thing I'm out through the Golden Gate, as the first picture will show, and they open up the nets, and you go through the gate, and we were 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm standing watch for the first time in a large ship like that, having never steered one, and it's a lot more tedious than you think, because you've got to keep it on course. And my reaction was to try to correct it, and the ship wouldn't come, so then I would go the other way. And the captain finally called down and said, haven't you ever steered a ship before? I said, no, sir. So he sent the first mate down, straightened me out and kicked it on the binnacle, and things went well after that. And so after about 3 or 5 days, we arrived in Eniwetok, and I sent a letter home to my wife telling her that I couldn't say that we were in Eniwetok, but I said, tell Anna we talk about her all the time. There's something wrong with it. And she couldn't figure it out. But in the meantime, I hadn't realized what had happened. And as I told you, I was moving my personal belongings up the Pine Street Hill in San Francisco, and one of the boxes fell out, and some woman found the box and called the FBI. Well, immediately they had a alien, somebody who was a subversive who was trying to escape the country, and my grandparents on my mother's side were German, so that made it all the more centered to the fact that I was an alien, subversive, and they came out to my wife's house, to our house, to interview her, and she was just terror-stricken. She didn't know what was coming off. I mean, having known her for 8 or 10 years and never had a feeling of any subversiveness or anything, she couldn't believe it, and the FBI had really cooked up a good case. They had gone to all the neighbors to find out about me, and so anyway, she said, well, I think the best thing to do is go see Jocelyn and Ryan, and they could straighten you out, which they did. And of course, in the negatives, I had all these from the Yuba manufacturing of the guns, and ship plans that I photographed for Jocelyn and Ryan, details of construction of the ship, and showing the framing. I'd worked with a model maker on it. So anyway, it was a pretty exciting story for my wife at the beginning. But once we were at sea and we hit our first port, my first call home was, please send some fish hooks. And my wife thought, well, that's a strange thing that, you know, send fish hooks. But anyway, she did, and she got the largest she could, which were a real large hook, and the package came with the hooks all coming through the wrapping. And the procedure was that after dinner every night, while we were in the atoll, they put the dinner garbage over the back of the fantail of the ship, and it was just swarmed with mackerel and small fish, and you made a gig out of these large hooks and jerked it quickly, and you were always able to hook a fish or two, which was bait you then threw over. And believe it or not, we kept a 12-foot by 8-foot fish locker filled with fish while we were at sea. And it was a good thing we did, because we ran out of food before the cruise was over. So anyway, that was a little bit of what goes on at night. And then the other recreation we had was going over. The Navy would call over and say they were having a certain film on board, and if we'd like to come over. So the crew from our ship would go over to the Navy ship, which was nearby, and watch the local movie that they were showing, and that was always good. The hazardous part was coming back at night. Usually the winds would come up and there'd be quite a sea, and the trick is you had to hook both ends, the blocks on both ends of the lifeboat at the same time, because if one hooked and the other didn't, the sea would practically capsize the boat, and it would be a really disaster. All right, so then after brief stays in several atolls, we moved on to Truk, and there are unit was formed into a convoy, and we sailed north for Okinawa and up the west coast of Okinawa, passing the Ryukyu Island, and anchored at Red Beach off Okinawa. And there is where a lot of the paintings I have in here, and my further adventures. While we were at port, they put on a cruise to unload the ships, and they were never too careful to handle. It was pretty haphazard, sling the things over, and the crews would take it off and put it in the lighters and landing craft. And if anything dropped in the water, that was, well, too bad, except when the liquor came to be unloaded, and they had a detachment of Marines on board to watch that nobody took anything from the liquor at that point, which I thought was interesting. I had retrieved several boxes of flash globes, little peanut-sized flash globes at the time, which you couldn't get in the States, and the Navy didn't want them, and so they said just keep them and take them home, which I did. But then we were coming to the end of our unloading our cargo, and a number of the members of our boat had been putting on a khaki shirt and khaki pair of pants and going ashore, which all you had to do was hop in one of the landing craft, and they would ride you in, and you go to the nearest road and tell them where you wanted to go, and an army truck would stop and give you a lift. So 3 of us decided that would be kind of great to see what Okinawa looked a little bit like, and we headed down toward Naha. And the fighting had ceased there, so we got to the little river just before you get to Naha, and there was a temporary bridge, and the guy driving the army truck said this is as far as he was going, but you walk across and that's where it is. So my 2 friends and I did that, looked around and saw how the city was bombed out, and decided we better be getting back to the ship, cut across the field, and there was this whole field of dead Japanese, just bloated. They'd been there for days, and we were sort of panic struck just because we didn't know whether they'd been mowed down by fire or stepped on landmines or what. So we figured the best thing was to get out of there. So we headed back to the ship, and of course, due to our bad luck, the air raid sounded, and we had to take cover. I dove into a Japanese burial site and hung out there until all clear was sounded, and then made my way back to the ship, only to be met by a rather mad captain, because I had not reported for my machine gun post, which was second loader. So after being chewed out the next morning and threatened to be sent back to the States, he decided that a good talking to was all that was necessary, and we were going to be headed back to San Francisco anyway, so I stayed on board. So that's about the background of my whole trip, and then I'll fill in with the pictures, I guess. And
How old were
wants to
you?
hold them up. The first one is
Did you have a question?
I wanted to know how old you were
How old I was
at that point.
at that point.
And
Well, I
what
was
year
born-
was it?
I was born in 1918, and this was 1945.
And what year was this that,
Pardon?
and what year was this that you had to take cover before you,
45.
1945.
45, thank you.
Pardon? I'm sorry.
That you took cover, it was 1945 when you
Yes,
had to
right.
take cover.
The pictures are primarily in 45, right, okay. So the first one was going out the gate, and I told you about that, and
And what kind of net was that?
They had big steel nets strung across, and they would open them up with a barge and let the ship out. And then after you were passed, they would close it up. That was to keep the submarines from coming through.
So are they open for every commercial ship or just for military ships or?
No, just they had to be open for any ship going out of the country, merchant marine, navy, or, in other words, no shipping was allowed of any kind.
There was no other shipping, just
No,
military
in
stuff?
the gate,
Ah,
unless the gate was open.
yeah.
So it was truly a golden gate. So after about 5 days, we came down to Hawaii, and that's the next picture. This was my first impression of Hawaii, was the view of Diamond Head, and this was really the first impression of Hawaii, looking off, and then we came up close to Diamond Head. But we passed on through, we didn't stop at Diamond Head, and it was another 5 days up the purpose. This is the convoy. Well, as halfway up to Okinawa, the convoy we were in, one of the ships developed engine problems, and we had to stop dead in the water, which is one of the things you fear most when you're out in that part of the Pacific at that time, because you're just a sitting duck for any submarine coming along. So we spent about 5 or 6 hours just waiting for the crew to try to repair the ship. They finally got it going, and then we took off on a zigzag pattern to Okinawa. And along the way, we came by the Kurimareta Islands, which were a group of small islands before you reach Okinawa. Both of these are the little islands, and they were beautifully kept. The sea walls along the ocean were all herringbone patterned with rock, the way they've been built, not just piled slapdash, but all beautifully lined up, as the Japanese were very meticulous about. And behind them were produce fields and going up in the jungles, up into the hills. But fortunately, no fighting had taken place on these islands. I guess the Japanese had felt they weren't worth defending, and they were practically untouched when we went by. And it wasn't long before we reached our destination at Red Beach in Okinawa. And there we lay at anchor until the work crews got around to our boat. And in the meantime, that's the islands off. This is the unloading on Red Beach, starting to unload the ship. And then this is the island of Okinawa, close up. I did several of that because we were at anchor for quite a while before any action. While we were at anchor, we had to spend our time chipping paint and painting and so forth the ship. And I was over the side of the ship. The boatswain decided, because I had some art talent, that I could put the white paint on the numbers showing how much draft the ship was taking. So they put me over the side of the ship, and then they frap you in with a line and draw you in close so you're not swinging out into space. So I'm happily painting away the numbers, and not with my back to what's going on, and a large ship went by and sent up this big wave. The next thing I knew, I was 3 feet underwater, and my paint bucket was full of water, and so they had to bring me back up and start all over again. So,
Did you run across any kamikazes yet?
We're coming to that. Okay, while we were there, we unloaded to Red Beach, and whether the depot had been hit by a kamikaze or negligence in handling the bombing material, had set off a huge explosion on Okinawa at the Red Beach that we were anchored at. And that's this photograph, or this painting. And it went on for several days with all kinds of flares, red, yellow, and going up in the air. And I guess they were doing their best to put it out, but it went on for some time. But the next painting shows the kamikaze. While we were at anchor, waiting to be unloaded, we never knew when we were going to be alerted. And the sirens would start, and as soon as the sirens started, the smoke boats would take off to cover the entire fleet of ships there with a thick smoke, so that any incoming kamikaze couldn't pick out a particular ship to hit. So this is my impression of what it looked like. And this is the beginning of it, looking down from the second gunner's post up on the bridge of the ship, of all the smoke boats weaving in and out. The next one, as I told you about, was the trip I shouldn't have taken but did, and nothing I can do about it this time but tell you about it. And this is the bridge across the little river entering into Naha, where was the end of the ride that the Army truck gave us and directed us on to Naha. And the next one is a scene in Naha as we came across it, and that's the telephone building there, which has been pretty heavily bombed, and a lot of the stores around it. And the next one is another view of Naha, showing more of the destruction of the city. That's all the city that we saw that was left. And so then, at that point, we were unloaded and set out for Saipan and Tinian. And halfway up there, we ran into a typhoon, and you can't imagine a ship. Ours wasn't a big ship, it was a C-1, but the ship, the whole bow would come out and you could almost see the keel of it, and it slapped down on this huge wave of water would splash up, and we couldn't sit down to eat for 2 days. We had to eat standing up. But finally the captain took on some water to weigh the ship down a little bit in the water, because we were like a cork bouncing around. And we finally got to Saipan and Tinian. This is the harbor at Tinian, and that's where the B-29s were taking off. We didn't know it at the time, but it was that particular day, Tinian and Saipan, that the B-29s were taken off for Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And so it wasn't, we were at sea about 2 days afterwards before we learned of the fact that the ships had, aircraft, B-29s had taken off for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that was the end of the trip, except for, instead of coming back to San Francisco, ended up in San Pedro and had to take the train from San Pedro back to the city. And that's the end of my story. You know, any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Well, what was the name of your C-1?
The C-1 was the Cape Little Vale.
Yeah.
It was named after a Cape and the southern boot of Italy. And we spent an hour or two on the ship looking over records trying to find out where it was ourselves at the time because we'd never heard of it.
And how large was your ship?
How
How
large?
large was your ship?
I'm sorry,
How large was the ship you were on?
it was the smallest of, there's three class, C1, C2, and C3. C1 I was on was the smallest. It was about, I guess, 600-700 feet long, 800 feet at the most. Then they got progressively bigger. And our cargo was multi-cargo. We carried everything from fuel oil to all types of first aid supplies, photographic equipment like flash globes, liquor, and machinery, you know, scrapers and earth moving machinery on board the ship.
And approximately how many people were on board your ship?
On board, well, there was there were 4 forecastles. There were 3 men to a forecastle, and each man has an hour and 20 minutes duty while you're at sea. So they're the 9 to 12, and the 12 to 4, and the 4 to 8, and the 9 to 12 again. So that's the rotation there. Then there were the Navy gunners, and there's the captain, first mate, the bosun, and the engineer and the engineering crew. And I don't know just how many they had in the engineering crew. I never did keep track of that.
So when you were in that typhoon, were people worried about their safety, or how do you
Well,
go on for several days?
if you were just like this and then the next minute the whole front of that ship slapped down and this huge spray of water and the ship would shudder, and that kept on, you know, for several hour after hour. You just wondered whether all those wells that had been hastily put together were gonna hold up.
Well, I was in San Diego when that typhoon happened,
Yeah,
and they were bringing ships back from Okinawa where these destroyers were just broken in half.
yeah,
They broke the ships right in two.
that's right. It was scary. I mean, especially when you're empty. When you're loaded, the ship tends to ride better in the water. But as I say, we were like a cork, you know. And that's when the captain started taking on water to fill some of the holes with water. So,
I believe in Okinawa, the Battle of Okinawa, the Navy lost more men in the Battle of Okinawa than they did all the rest of the war.
they launched what? One
They,
man.
they lost more men, more sailors,
Yeah.
than they did on all the rest of the war in the
Really?
South Pacific account because of the kamikazes
Yes,
or
that's right.
hitting them.
And you never know. Of course, we were fortunate because we were at the tail end of it, and I guess the flights weren't as numerous, but that's something to. We were my first night in Okinawa, and we're anchored. Everything's quiet. It's silence. The smoke boats are out, and you don't know what to expect. I was up in my post was up on the top side where the captain was, and a gun turret as a second loader, and the Navy gunner was there. So we're all wondering what's coming next, and all of a sudden, this cruiser that was next to us let go with everything they had on board, I'm sure. It's hard to believe, but it just turned the sky red with tracer bullets, just sprayed in the direction of where the plane was coming for us. And I don't see how any plane could get through it if, you know, they were in any position, but that's something that when you get that many guns, cannons and machine guns, it's a scary. Served at that time enough for what they did for the rest of us to be here today.
How many veterans do we have here in this room?
I'm sorry,
I would just ask.
well-versed, well-traveled person and had lots of stories to tell and lots of experiences.
I think she did the Colorado River trip and lost most of her photographic equipment. When she did that Colorado rafting trip, you know, and she was quite elderly at that time and lost a lot of her camera equipment because I think they capsized. That was nothing that bothered her particularly.
So if there anything else anybody would like to ask Dean? Well, we certainly thank you so very much for being here and sharing your stories.
Thank you, the
And I'm
pleasure's
sure
mine,
that
I'm sure.
the paintings are here for you to look at.
Great.
So refreshments will be served in the kitchen, so be sure to have some. And next month, in honor of Father's Day, we'll be having Bill Brazil and
Lance Johansson.
Lance Johansson telling stories about their fathers.
Aw.
So be sure to come back in June, the fourth Sunday, 3 o'clock.
Pretty clever to get this one. Very exciting.
That was a wonderful presentation, thank you so much.
It's a little jumpy, I'm afraid, but
Perfect.
Very
Perfect.
Fascinating.
These are photographs my
A lot
father
of
took
very
on
big
Okinawa. I know
battle.
we were out today, but sometimes we wanted to just. These are photos her father took on Okinawa.
Oh.
There, that's him. With his speed graphics. So I'll call about coming out to the sometime. I'm Jessica. Yeah, I know where it's been. I think I was there once.
As in United.
Yeah, one little freeze frame, one.